the virtual third meeting of the Board of Directors of the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation. As a City of Toronto Corporation, the Board of Directors acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The board also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We will all have an opportunity to reflect on this history and our understanding of the current challenges of Canada's Indigenous people on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, Thursday. Last meeting, our interim transitional lead, Michael Sherrar, has successfully recruited the majority of the interim transitional team, who he will introduce shortly. Their collective expertise in finance, communications and stakeholder relations, human resources, and project management will be critical to the successful implementation of our transition plan in the months ahead. The primary agenda item today is the presentation, discussion, and approval of the plan for transition of the operations of the seniors housing portfolio on June 1st, 2022. The same plan will be considered by the Toronto Community Housing Board on October 7th. Michael and I have met with Tim Murphy, Board Chair, and Jag Sharma, CEO of Toronto Community Housing, to set the stage for these discussions. And I will say more about this when we discuss the plan later in the agenda. Finally, we have another first at this meeting: the opportunity for members of the public to make a deputation to the board in relation to specific agenda items. We have received one request for deputations in relation to item 13, the joint TCHC-TSHC transition work plan. Due to the fact that our meetings are still not live, Maureen Kohesi will join us by phone and will not be seen on the screen. She will be invited to speak to the board for a maximum of 5 minutes. And while directors have the opportunity to ask questions, I would ask you to be brief and focus only on matters for clarification. And with that, may I now have a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Warren, thank you. Seconder?
Happy to second. It's Linda.
Thank you, Linda. All in favor? Any opposed?
Yeah.
Thank you. So our, excuse me, item 3 is the approval of the public minutes
in the minutes
from August 11th. Are there any errors or omissions? And if not, may I have a motion to approve them?
Harry, approve.
Harry, thank you. Seconder?
Seconded by Paul.
Paul, thanks very much. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Item 4, excuse me, is the approval of the closed session minutes of June 30th. Could I have a mover?
I'll move.
Hello? Who is that? Oh, Jim, thank you.
And
Seconder?
seconded, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And finally, the approval of the closed minutes of August 11th. Could I have a mover? Sorry, I should have asked if there were any errors or omissions.
Happy to move, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Seconder?
Seconded by Paul.
Thank you, Paul. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. So just so you know, I am still only seeing 4 people on the screen and it's all coming in and out constantly. So presume that you're not, that I'm not able to see you, if you will. I'm sorry about this. And so we'll just have to really speak up. I should say, by the way, just on the minutes, because you'll note we just approved the closed session minutes in open session. And I asked about that, and my understanding is that we will, unless there is any matter that anyone wishes to raise in those minutes, they are approved in open session. But if there's a matter that anybody wishes to raise regarding the minutes, then we would go into closed session to do so. So the next item, item 6, Michael, is the transitional lead report. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and welcome everyone to our third board meeting. I just want to start by saying that, you know, I'm very pleased with the progress that we're making, and it is in large part due to just fantastic support from both city staff and the leadership team at Toronto Community Housing. Both teams have just been incredibly supportive
Morning.
of our work and helping at every step of the way. That's Emma, Jen, Michael Smith, Kevin at the city, and others as well. And the whole team at Toronto Community Housing have been, as I say, incredibly supportive. One of my main objectives since the last meeting has been to put our transition team in place. And that's going to be very important for us to have the expertise that we need to develop the plans that we're going to talk about later in the work plan in partnership with Toronto Community Housing and the city. That team now is almost completely in place, and I just want to introduce the team to you, some of whom you've met and some of whom you have not yet. Of course, first was Rajni Vaidaraj, who's our executive assistant, helping me, the transition team, and the board through all the work that we have to do. Arlene Howells joined us with her background in communications and stakeholder relations, and she's working closely with Toronto Community Housing and with the city with respect to the communications plan that we will need for all of the key audiences, whether it's the tenants themselves, the employees who are going to be transferring to the new to our corporation, and of course the city, and she's working hard on that. Norman Reese is our interim finance lead, and he's going to be overseeing, of course, the work that we're doing from a financial perspective over the transition period and managing our affairs as a corporation. But he, of course, is our key lead in working with Toronto Community Housing and the city with respect to our budget post-transition. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Unfortunately, Norm couldn't join us today, but you'll meet him very soon, I think, at upcoming meetings.
High-low eye drops, the basket.
Mary Tate is on the screen here, and Mary is our interim project management lead. Mary's got tremendous background and expertise in launching public sector startups and managing those from a project perspective. So I'm delighted that Mary is able to join us. And interestingly, prior to housing becoming a municipal responsibility, Mary worked in this area when it was a provincial responsibility with the provincial government. So she's got a tremendous background and expertise. Mary, do you just want to wave? There's Mary. And do you want to add anything, Mary, to what I've said?
Thank you very much, Michael. I just want to let everybody know that I'm really looking forward to working with you all. I will join back in to hear your discussion of the project plan that you're talking about later. And I'm looking forward to developing that plan further and working with all of the team members and the city and Toronto Community Housing to launch this new corporation.
Thank you, Mary. So Mary's going to keep us all on track and make sure that the key milestones are met so that we can meet that date that we're going to talk about later, June 1st, 2022. Helen Ferreira Walker is going to be starting next week. She's our interim human resources lead. She is just finishing 10 years as executive vice president and chief of human resources at Metrolinx. So she has tremendous expertise leading the development of human resource functions, but I think critically as well has tremendous background in labor relations and working with union groups, as we will be doing in the transfer of employees from Toronto Community Housing. So Helen is starting on Monday, and we'll of course have an opportunity to introduce her to you then. So that's the team currently. There's 6 of us, and there's one more, which we are in the middle of the recruitment process, and that's our first permanent position, which is for General Counsel and Corporate Secretary. And as we've talked about in the past meeting, this is an appointment that's going to be made by the board, and Warren, Maureen, with my assistants, are going through that process. In fact, we met yesterday just shortlist the candidates. We're hoping to be interviewing them over the next 2 weeks, and I'm hopeful that we will be completed so that we can bring back a candidate for your consideration and approval at the October meeting, if we're able to do that. So with that, that is the planned team. That'll be 7 of us. The General Counsel, as well as supporting the board in the Corporate Secretary role, is also going to be taking the lead on issues with respect to the lease that we will be undertaking with Toronto Community Housing. So I'm just very thankful that we have such a strong team. I think that will put us in a very good position to do the work both in a timely but very effective way for transition. Just want to mention a couple of things. We're going to talk about the work plan later, but you'll remember at the last meeting, and part of that work plan, of course, is the budget that we're going to go through post-transition budget work with Toronto Community Housing. And one of the items that the board was very interested in seeing and understanding that we had access to the detailed expenses associated with seniors housing within Toronto Community Housing. Norm has received all of that information in working with the CFO at Toronto Community Housing. They have been tremendously helpful, and so we are now in receipt of the complete line-by-line detail of operating expenses and revenues, though both direct and Toronto Communities Housing's assessment of the indirect expenses associated with Toronto Seniors Housing. So Norm will be going through that, and we'll have a chance to report back to the board on his assessment of those revenues and expenses. And of course, that will be the foundation of the work we do with Toronto Community Housing and the city to arrive at a budget for Toronto Seniors Housing post-transition. So I just wanted to report that item from the last meeting is completed, and that we have that information, and we'll present that back to the board as soon as we are able to. We'll talk about the work plan in detail later. Just one other item I wanted to alert you to is that I have been working with Toronto Community Housing on the issue of a potential location for our corporate office once we're operating. I am looking at with them the potential that office is located in one of the seniors buildings. There are a couple of seniors buildings that have suitable office spaces and are used already as office spaces by the seniors housing unit within Toronto Community Housing. And I will be coming back to the board, perhaps at the next meeting, with a recommendation of how we proceed on that issue of location for the corporation, as we're able to work with Toronto Community Housing to make sure that those plans are going to be effective for the corporation going forward. So I just wanted to alert you to that issue as one of the things that I'll be working on and bringing back to the board at a subsequent meeting. I think those are the key issues that I wanted to cover, Maureen. Arlene has just joined us as well, Arlene Howes, who I think all of you have met at the orientation, except Paul, I think, has not met Arlene. So Arlene's leading, as I said, our work with Toronto Community Housing, particularly on the issues, of course, of communications, but working with Toronto Community Housing on making sure that we can engage with tenants along the way so that they're aware of the work that we're doing, are able to have input to it. Of course, thinking ahead towards Toronto Seniors Housing's approach to tenant engagement for the future. I'll leave it at that, Maureen, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Michael. And are there any questions for Michael? Paula?
Thank you, Michael. It's so exciting to hear about the team that you're pulling together, and I'm getting all of the regular emails. So pleased to announce this new person, that new person. And I'm just hoping that somewhere in the minutes or somewhere, we'll just have that list, because it's a great team and we should just be able to refer to it really quickly if you don't mind. But
yeah, absolutely.
Time to welcome everybody. I guess it's the first meeting that they've all been here. And I'd just like to also take the opportunity to welcome the city manager, who doesn't always come to our board, and our regular board member, Paul Johnson, who's our new deputy city manager, who just started, I think, at the beginning of September. So when we set up, Juliana Carboni was on, and then she retired and we had somebody interim. So Paul is our permanent seniors board member. So I think this is a very exciting moment. And thank you, Michael, for all that work. It's great.
If I may, I just noticed, Maureen, that Rima Patel is on the line as well. Rima works with Michael Smith at the city, and also made a tremendous contribution to helping us get set up and all the functions that we need as a corporation, and terrific advice along the way as well. Just a fantastic city team.
Thank you. Brenda?
Hi, thank you. Michael, is there any expected date when we can expect to hear the budget details? You say you're working on it, but I wanted to know when. Is it next board meeting you're aiming to share that with us?
Yes, I think that would be ideal, Brendan. I'm sure Norm will be in a position to give a first view of that to the board at the next meeting. We'll be happy to bring that back at the end of October.
Thank you.
Just, Maureen, if I may, there was just one other issue. I just wanted to mention that Jag Sharma, who's the CEO, and I met with one of the organized tenant groups at Toronto Community Housing, and that's the Seniors Tenants Advisory Committee, which was set up primarily to advise Toronto Community Housing and the city on the implementation of the new integrated service model. And so we used that opportunity at one of their meetings to talk about where we are and to introduce the work plan to them, and understanding that this was going to be presented to both boards. So that was a very good first opportunity for us as a corporation to engage with tenants at Toronto Community Housing.
Thanks, Michael. And maybe when we come to the item of the transition plan, you can let us know any feedback from the group.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for that report, Michael. That takes us to item 7, conflict of interest. Does anyone have any conflict of interest to declare related to today's agenda? No, being none, thank you. The item 8 is the proposed policy for closed board meetings. There is one addition. You'll see, those of you who got to the end and wondered what was the last sentence. At the very end, it should say, as with all closed session agenda items, any motions stemming from the discussion must be made and voted upon in open session. So we, in conversation, Michael, we felt this is having a policy on open and closed board meetings is standard governance practice. We already have the matters under which closed session is appropriate, but I thought it was important to identify not only the topics that would be addressed in closed session, but also the process by which those closed session would occur. So for matters other than those that are formally on the agenda. So I welcome any questions or comments on it, and we have a motion for approval. Are there any questions or comments on policy?
I just have one question, Maureen, if I can, please. Just for training and other purposes, I think we should, I don't know if it's in here, obviously the City of Toronto Act and the Shareholders City of Toronto Act governs the board. So everything has to be in public unless it meets these criteria. Just want to be clear on that. Michael's nodding his head. Yes, Michael?
Yeah.
So generally, our business should be in public unless it covers some of those things, and then some of the materials could be posted. So some of the things from our orientation, I think, were fantastic. They're not confidential items, and perhaps could go on the website of the Seniors Corporation, because it's the first time that all that information has been comprised into one place.
Yeah. Maybe I could address that, Maureen. Yeah, it's very, very good, Paula. And there's lots of information that we're looking at currently. We are in the process of setting up a corporate website. We have just signed a contract with a company that's providing wraparound service for us, and included in that, and they'll be working closely with our lead to determine how we will set that up, and also what information would be best to go on that website. So that process is just underway, Paula, and we'll look at, you know, what is the key information that we might put up there. So if any board members have views on that, or that would be very helpful, and we'll look at that in the context of what we might put up there on that new website. Probably in the next few weeks, that will be.
That's great. Can I ask, Michael, that you look at what portions of the board orientation package should be up, because technically much of it is public information, and I want to be really careful that we're always doing in public what we have to do in public. Very conscious of that. And nobody more conscious than Councillor Ainsley, the open data champion of City Council. So he's on our board. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think if I just might add, Councillor Fletcher, I think that hopefully that came through in the policy, that the default for everything we will do is open, unless, as you say, it fits that criteria, those criteria, and that there is a there's a very good look each time we decide to make something confidential, that it absolutely fits that, and that there's very good reason to do that. So I really appreciate that intent, and I think that will be our intent, of course, as a corporation.
Thanks, Michael. Any other questions or comments on this policy? And if not, could you bring up the resolution, please? So be it resolved that the directors receive the report and approve the Seniors Housing Corporation meeting closed session policy. Could I have a motion to approve this?
Madam Chair, I so move.
Okay.
Thank you, Warren. Seconder,
Carrie, second.
Carrie. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any
Yes.
opposed? Carried. Thank you. The next item, actually the next two items are in the governance work group and CEO search process are in addition to the transition work plan that Michael is leading. These are the two processes that we will be leading within the board to get ourselves underway to the next level. So the first one is the governance work group. You will see that there are proposed terms of reference and timeline for this group that will assist us in getting our board standing committee structure as in place. As you know, to this point, we've been working basically in committee of the whole, and as we go forward, there will be matters obviously that will require further work done by subcommittees of the board in order to bring them forward for the board's consideration. So this is our opportunity to put in or to recommend to the board based on our or following our discussion at our orientation about how we'd like to the considerations related to our setting up standing committees and how we'd like to set up some committees, perhaps in a different way than CCHC has done. This is our opportunity to bring a proposal back to the board for considering at our next meeting. And you will see that the terms of reference essentially are sequential. First of all, that the subgroup that has been proposed would come back with a proposed the proposed number and nature of the standing committees, followed by a subsequent canvass of interest from all members of the board on committees they'd like to serve, and then following that, development of terms of reference for those committees on the understanding that they would be draft and the committees themselves would have an opportunity to review them. So the proposed timelines for that process to get us get the standing committees in place is really between now and our November board meeting, and on the understanding that that if there needs to be some slippage, okay, but I really would like to have our standing committees in place and up and running by the end of the year. And the membership has been proposed here. I would mention that in striking both this group, this work group, and the CEO search work group, I've spoken to each member of the board, with the exception of Councillor Ainsley, who I still haven't been able to speak to, but hope to do so this week. And I'm delighted that members of the board have all agreed to serve on one or the other. So, so I'm happy to have any questions or comments about the term preference membership timelines for the work group on the standing committee structure. Any questions or comments? Oh, okay.
Just,
May I then have?
I just have one, Maureen. We have all members of the board except for one on these committees because Paul isn't on any committee. And he is a full.
Well,
member,
I
so
didn't, actually, the,
just
Councillor
checking.
Fletcher, the ex officio member is actually Chris Murray.
Okay,
I know Paulins, but the ex officio director, Chris Murray, I didn't include him because he is ex officio, but if he wishes to be included in one or the other, I would be happy to do so.
Yeah, I think we
And I
should
see you
see.
there, Chris. Do you want to comment, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, any kind of future hiring, I think if you want my support on that, I'd be happy to do that of a CAO or CEO, sorry.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so Monique, could you bring the motion up, please? So be it resolved that we receive the report and approve the establishment of the work group, TSHC work group, according to the governance work group terms of reference. I have a motion to adopt this.
So moved. Carrie?
Carrie, thank you.
Second.
And I think Paula
Second.
seconded it.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Item 10 is approval of the CEO search process. We again have had a previous discussion of the importance of this process to the board. The report that you have in front of you again sets out the proposed terms of reference of the group, including retaining the recruiting and retaining a search firm. With the assistance of the search firm, developing a position description, which would be prepared as a result of consultation with key stakeholders, posting the position, selecting and interviewing a short list of candidates, and then recommending the finalist candidate to the board for approval. So again, we're looking at a timeline for this, which is much longer given the nature of this, beginning again next week, where we would review, finalize the RFP, and going through until April 1st. And Michael and I did have discussion about the time of this, and we agreed that it was really critical that the CEO, once selected, have the opportunity to be actively engaged in the final stages of preparation for the target transition date of June 1st, and therefore we worked back from that in terms of the process for recruitment. So again, members have been identified, and thank you, Chris, for your willingness to be involved in this as well. And I would welcome any question or comments.
Just to
Councillor,
just to further support, I think it would be great to have Chris or join that. So should that be formally added to the terms of reference, Maureen? I think we should actually then. If you need
Yes.
any motions or anything, I'd be happy to add that to add that to this really great group that you've got together.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Okay, Linda, you'd like to move then that we?
I'm happy to move and that we add Chris to the group.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder for that motion first?
Lawrence,
Lawrence,
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Lawrence. And then the motion as amended, could I have a mover for that? Hello?
Chair, so moved. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Brenda. Seconder?
Councillor
Oh,
Fletcher.
sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Paula, thank you, Paula. Councillor Fletcher, seconder? Okay, I think that was Brenda moving and Councillor Fletcher seconding. Is that right? Okay, thank you. All in favor? Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. That takes us to item 11, the approval of the TSHC interim insurance coverage. Michael?
Great. Thank you very much, Maureen. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great.
A lot.
And I'm hoping I've just sent Melissa Ferreira a note because Melissa has been providing tremendous support for this as the city's Director of Insurance and Risk Management, and she offered to join us. So I just sent her a note, and hopefully she'll be able to join us, really to answer any questions with respect to the motion here. But the background is that, of course, as a corporation, we require insurance. And in fact, when we are an operating corporation with responsibility for seniors housing, we will need a set of relatively complex insurance. That process is just starting. Norm, as our interim financial lead, is taking the lead on this with the city, with Toronto Community Housing, and with who are going to be the potential insurers for us as a corporation. So that's a complex piece of work, and we will bring that back at a later date. In the meantime, we require relatively simple insurance as a corporation that's planning for this transition. And since the board was struck, had your first meeting on June 30th, the corporation has in fact been insured under the city's insurance plan, which is a comprehensive errors and omissions insurance plan for the activities of the city, and in fact many of the corporations that come under the city. So we have been insured with that plan, and we agreed at that time and again in August that we would bring this back to have the board consider this plan for the balance of the transition period. And so we are in fact coming back today. And this, I had a meeting with the city and with the city's insurance broker back in August to look at this and review this insurance coverage, which at the time appeared to me and to the city, to the insurance broker, as being quite adequate for our purposes during transition. But I did want Norm to be able to have a look at this before we brought it back for approval. So Norman has done that. He's gone through that review with the city in terms of that insurance coverage. And he is satisfied that this more than adequately covers us for the activities that we are going to be engaged in through this transition period. And so we're bringing that back for formal approval, that we would, and I think that's Melissa, who's joined us there, Melissa Ferreira, who's the director for the city on insurance and risk management. And with Melissa's support, you'll see a briefing note by Melissa in terms of the extent of that coverage, which is very substantial, and I think very good protection for the board and officers of the company through this transition period. So I'll leave it at that, Maureen, and you'll see the motion, and Melissa is here who can answer any specific questions on that insurance coverage.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome, Melissa. And are there any questions for Michael or Melissa on the insurance? No? Oh, yes, Brenda?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question. That insurance coverage specifically covers coverage of the board of directors and their completion of their duties?
That's correct, Brenda.
All right, thank you.
The other good thing about this coverage is it comes at no cost to us as a corporation. So now, when we secure the coverage that we will need as an operating company, that will come at a cost, of course, but that will come later. But this is provided at no cost to us by the city as long as we hold this insurance coverage.
Great, thanks very much. Could we have the motion, Monique? So could I have a mover for the adoption of this errors and omissions insurance plan? Until
Moved by Paul.
Paul, thank you.
Seconded by
Second.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Yes, we are.
Thanks again to Melissa, again, for all the tremendous support you've provided us over the last few weeks in getting this prepared. Thank you.
Quite welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we are substantially ahead of schedule. So, Michael, is there anyone else that needs to be alerted to that? Are we okay to move on to the auditor?
We are okay to move on to the auditor. We'll have the deputant coming for the work plan, but I think Rajni and Emma will alert the deputant that we're ahead of schedule, so that's fine.
Okay, thank you. So that takes us to item 12, the approval of the TSHC auditor for 2021. Michael?
Yes, I'm really doing this in lieu of Norm's report to us. So, and then just thanks to Kevin at the city in particular, who's been working on behalf of the corporation and closely with Norm since he's taken up his role. And then, of course, this needed to come back to the board. We talked about it at the prior board meetings in terms of the need for the city to appoint an auditor for Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation based on a recommendation by us as a corporation. So Norm's report is there. He's reviewed the letter of engagement that was sent to Maureen some time ago. Advice and work of Kevin Lee at the city. Norm's gone through that with KPMG and with Kevin. And Norm is recommending that we make this recommendation that this is just for the 2021 year, so this is just for this fiscal year. So it's really not much to audit. We haven't even got our funds yet from the city, but we will very shortly. So it's a relatively modest budget, and of course all of the transactions associated with that budget up until December 31st. And as you can see, a modest fee for KPMG to provide those services. And then we'll be looking, of course, at the longer term for the corporation and making a recommendation in collaboration with the city, of course, who will appoint our auditors for the coming years. And of course, KPMG in this role are the city's auditors. And Norm's looked at the engagement letter. It's very similar, of course, to the city's engagement terms with KPMG, although the cost is much less, of course. So we're at the point where Norm is recommending that the board approve that recommendation to the city for KPMG to be our auditor for the 2021 year. And the engagement letter is there in your
Just a question.
package if you want to go through all of that. Yeah.
Just a question related to the timing, Michael, that given that that this recommendation will be made at this point and the city's annual meeting has already occurred, it will go forward to how will that be addressed at the city to appoint the auditor as recommended?
That I'm not exactly clear on, but I'll work with the city staff on that approval. Let me just look at the.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll have to confirm that, Maureen.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions for Michael on the selection of KPMG as our auditor for the balance of 2021? Okay, may I have the motion, Monique? So the resolution to appoint KPMG for the year end December 3rd, 31st, 2021 with remuneration set at 7,500 plus HST, and that I be authorized to sign the audit engagement letter.
Madam Chairman, Warren moves.
Thank you, Warren. Seconder?
Carrie.
Carrie? Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Brenda, I see you have your hand up there. Is that from the previous item? Okay, thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 13, which is, as I mentioned, our primary and very significant item today, the approval of the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, Toronto Community Housing Corporation Joint Transition Work Plan. I'm delighted to welcome our very first deputant to the board of Toronto Seniors Housing. And can you tell me if Maureen Kohesi is with us, Monique?
Hi, Maureen and Michael. This is Rajni. We are trying to reach the deputant, but unfortunately, we are getting her voicemail. So we are going to be trying to reach her again.
Yes, I realize she won't be expecting to be coming this early, so.
I sent her an email already to say that the meeting is proceeding quickly and if she can be available, but I'm getting her voicemail.
Okay, then can I suggest, Michael, that we go ahead with the presentation, and then when we've reached Ms. Kohesi, we'll hear from her at that time.
Yes, I think that's right. So Rajni, just let us know, just interrupt when the deputant is able to make that deputation, and we'll stop proceedings and so that they can
We'll
speak
do that,
together.
Michael. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Maureen. And again, I just want to thank particularly the team at Toronto Community Housing who have been incredibly supportive in the work to arrive at a work plan that you've got in front of you. This is the same document in terms of the joint work that will go for consideration to the Toronto Community Housing Board meeting on October 7th. And in fact, JAG and the board chair have asked that I attend that meeting for that agenda item at Toronto Community Housing. So I think that will be very helpful. I've met with the CEO, Jag Sharma, at Toronto Community Housing several times now, and I think we're very much on the same page with respect to this work and how we can proceed to meet that transition date that we, if approved here and at Toronto Community Housing as well, will be the date under which we take over responsibility for the seniors buildings and for the seniors tenants, and that's June 1st, 2022. In addition to those joint pieces of work, you will see on the work plan down at the bottom, there are things that are specific to Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, and I'm sure there will be issues that are specific to Toronto Community Housing that they have on their work plan. And the key item, of course, is the search and appointment of a permanent CEO for the corporation. That's one of the big pieces of work. But there are other pieces of work that we will undertake as a corporation to make sure that we are ready as a corporation once that transition occurs, including kind of all of the work around the initial organizational design. strategies for the organization that then the CEO and their team, as they recruit that team, can work with as we take over responsibility for seniors housing in the city. For the joint pieces of work, and this, I think, will be very much our priority as a corporation, working with Toronto Community Housing to make sure that we complete a timely but effective and high quality way are those four pieces of work. Those are the shared services piece of work. So this is essentially a long list of activities and services that we need to determine with Toronto Community Housing how those services are going to be provided once we take over operational responsibility. And there are a number of choices that we will make together with respect to those services. It could be that we take those on as a corporation to manage ourselves from the outset upon transition. There'll be services that we think for issues of finance or critical mass or effectiveness, it's best in our best interests as a corporation and best interests of tenants that we continue to rely on Toronto Community Housing to provide those services. And that may be direct or through a contract with us as a corporation. And we need to look at all of those. And there may be some services that we say, yes, in the long run, it may well make sense for Toronto Seniors Housing to provide those services as a corporation, independently of Toronto Community Housing. But as a priority relative to the transition and a transition date of June 1st, 2022, we think it's better to review those at a later date. So there may be some services that we say for a year, 2 years, we're going to continue with Toronto Community Housing, and then we'll review that at a future date to look at whether we should take those on ourselves. The city has, and this was prior to my starting, or in fact to Jag starting as the CEO of Toronto Community Housing, the city have undertaken to secure a consultant to help us in that work. And I think that's going to be very helpful as a kind of independent set of eyes with expertise looking at that list of shared services and providing advice back to us. That process is, I think, just about completed in terms of securing that consultant, and we'll be able to start work with them to work on those shared services with Toronto Community Housing. The second area is the plan, I think that everyone is aware of, that Toronto Community Housing will retain ownership of the buildings that will come under our operational responsibility. And that's for a number of very good reasons with respect to finance, with respect to capital for those buildings. What that means is that we will need to undertake a lease agreement with Toronto Community Housing such that on June 1st, 2022, we will have executed a lease for those buildings and through that process become the landlord for the tenants in all of those buildings. So we will do the work, of course, to develop that lease agreement and execute it so that we're ready upon transition. The third major piece of work is the transition of employees who currently form the seniors housing unit at Toronto Community Housing, and all of the employees who work in the buildings for Toronto Community Housing, and the plan that those employees will be transitioned to become employees of Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation. That's primarily two groups who are members of a union, two locals of a union that we will be working with in concert with Toronto Community Housing to develop the plan for the transition of those employees. And of course, Helen will take the lead on that work. And then the final piece of work that Norm will be leading, we talked about a little bit already, is the plan for what will be the budget for Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation going forward after transition, and working that out with both Toronto Community Housing and with the city, of course, with the rent geared to income program in terms of the income that will then come to Toronto Seniors Housing. Of course, that budget discussion will be not independent, of course, of issues like shared services and the lease agreement. So all of these pieces of work, and the employee transfer as well, all of these pieces of work need to hang together so that when we see them as a whole, we can see how they all fit together, and they'll be done in parallel. So not a simple set of pieces of work. And of course, Mary Tate is going to take the lead on making sure that all of those pieces of work are coordinated and fit together for our approval as a corporation, Toronto Community Housing approval. You'll see on the work plan that in these major pieces of work, we're going to have opportunities for the board to review progress on them through the duration of those pieces of work, and have one or two points of review prior to the point at which those agreements come back to the board for approval. And those approvals are going to be anywhere from December to May for those pieces of work. But there'll be opportunities for the board to review the direction we're taking or planning to take, and then of course the final approvals for each of those pieces of work. And those approval dates will be coordinated with Toronto Community Housing. So those dates on there that you see for the board approvals align, of course, with our board meeting dates. And we're able to make those approvals in parallel at both boards. I think those were the major things that I wanted to
Hi, Michael. I have the deputant on the line. If you're ready, I'll patch her in.
That's great, Rajni. I think that's a good time, and then we can resume afterwards. So we'll now, Maureen, if that's okay, go to the deputant.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Hello?
Maureen, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Maureen Clohessy.
Welcome,
Can you hear
Maureen. Yes, we can. And just so you know, you're making history. You're the first deputant to the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation Board of Directors. So we'd like to welcome you, and we look forward to hearing from you. You'll have, I think as the staff have indicated, you'll have 5 minutes to speak to the board. I'll let you know when you've hit 4 minutes so that you can wind up, and then there may be questions for you, but we appreciate very much your making the time to join us, and please go ahead. Hello? Oh dear.
Do you still have
Rajni?
Maureen, Rajni?
Sorry,
sorry about that.
Okay?
Can we just, Maureen, can we just ask you to start again? We just had a muting issue here. Sorry about that, everyone. Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, okay, please go ahead, Maureen. Welcome.
Thank you. I also would just like to introduce myself as an engagement member at my building, lead of the Tenant Association, and a member of STAC. And I'd like to thank you for being here and for listening to me. I would like to say I was glad to hear at the recent STAC meeting with Michael Scherer and Jag Sharma that the communication plan that you're developing is a two-way work plan, listening to all parties, including tenants. What frightens me about it is that the phrase "through existing TCHC channels," because I believe we all know those need to be improved upon. Right now, it's a one-sided system. What I'd like to share are some of the ideas and suggestions put forward by STAC to the SHU management, the Senior Tenant Advisory Committee, last December, which we are still waiting to have implemented. They primarily break down into paper and in person, and I think that's important. because although mainstream society communicates through technology, approximately 2/3 or more of our senior tenants are either uneducated on the most basic of computer skills or have very limited access. So paper and in-person are the tools that they use for communication. So just starting with paper, I just want to stress how important posters are in the building, that they're in the appropriate font size and language with phone numbers to respond to. Poster boards are not always well maintained, so I think a little work needs to be done on that. They can be overcrowded with outdated materials, and there also needs to be a system of follow-up on whether important posters are even going out and being put up, because in a lot of buildings they're not. Currently, right now, other than receiving the poster on doing deputations, there's actually no information up at all on the ISM, the SHU, STAC, or the new corporation. And I believe tenants need to get that information. Also in paper, even questionnaires to some units or all units or some buildings with envelopes, so tenants can respond and give their thoughts without repercussion from staff. We've also suggested physical mailboxes in the building for people to write down their comments or questions and use those. Tenant information racks was thought of, which will hold many updates, policies, and can include local service info. The Seniors Speak newsletter, currently we're waiting for the Seniors Q&A column to be adopted. The tenant input from STAC members is modified or not allowed. Questions to STAC don't go to STAC, they go to the SHU administration, and there's no direct access to the communication department, so there could be some improvements made around the newsletter. And then to in-person, and I'm going to start with STAC. A year and a half late in being formed, and not meeting monthly as it was directed to do, I believe that STAC has been undervalued and underutilized. Moving forward, I would like to see the city's senior services and even Tenants First play a more active role rather than arm's length in using this valuable communication resource. I also believe STAC should have some form of access, whether it just be to minutes or presence or whatever, to the joint operations table so that they can fulfill the City Council directive, which was to directly access, inform, and influence services and programs to be provided by the new Seniors Housing Corporation. Back to tenant engagement. STAC asked SHU last year for a list of current tenant reps to share information, but haven't received it yet. That department has already taken 3.5 years to hold building elections, and more than half of the buildings still haven't had them. So it might be hard to contact buildings through that system. But I'm sure that the SSCs or the building staff could develop a list of buildings that have no current tenant leaders so that we could set up a plan to communicate with them. Finally, just staff. I think that I know that I knew you have ongoing talks with staff and with union members, but I was thinking also an anonymous system of some kind for union and non-union personnel that doesn't go directly to their employer, would allow multiple levels of staff to communicate in a more honest and safe manner. So I hope these are helpful suggestions, and thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Maureen, and they've been very helpful because we are very much looking at how we can build upon and evolve over time our processes of tenant engagement, and this is a very important contribution to starting that discussion. So
thank you.
Before we let you go, are there any questions for Maureen that anyone would like to ask? Carrie?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Maureen.
Hi, Carrie.
I'm wondering if I could get a comment from you because you're very well placed in a lot of forums where you get a lot of feedback from tenants. And as you can see on the work plan, under the communication plan, a draft has been developed and an implementation is coming, in June. Can you just comment on the wording of that? Because I think it's tenants that I speak to would like to be they'd like to be involved in the development of plans. And,
well, I agree with you. We're often asked, when we are asked, we're often asked after the fact. So if there's a draft and then an implementation, I'm sure that tenants would like to have comments, share their input on the draft prior to the implementation, so that can be included in the implementation plan.
Thank you, Maureen and Carrie. Any other questions for Maureen? Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you. Hi, Maureen. Thanks for being our first deputant. It was great.
Oh, my pleasure.
I just was really interested in what you said about the stack because I don't know very much about it. Did you say that was, can you read what you said there? It was to do what? It was established through tenants first or established, what was the basis of it? Because I think it's a pretty important organization internally for us.
Well, I'm looking at the City Council EX 7.1, dated July 16th, 2019. I can read you this. It's the third paragraph, and I'll read the paragraph to you. City Council is to direct the Deputy City Manager, Community and Social Services, to work with Toronto Community Housing to establish a Senior Tenant Advisory Committee, that would be us, a Senior Tenant Accessibility Advisory Committee, which was never formed, and other relevant bodies to ensure that senior tenants can directly access, inform, and influence services and programs to be provided by the new Seniors Housing Corporation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I was unaware, actually, that had come through, I guess, the tenants first, and your role was to assist in the teeing up of the whole new corporation. And Paul's new, is not Juliana. So I don't want to put him on the spot about that. But I think it would be helpful to understand what that role of stack is in general, because you're not associated with our corporation, but apparently you're giving advice about what we should be looking for to make sure we meet certain things with this corporation. That was unclear to me until your deputation, actually. So
yeah, and the opportunity we have to give advice is very limited.
So, and I don't think this is the forum for that discussion, but it would be helpful just to understand some of the things. I think a lot of what you do knowing that 2/3 of seniors don't have computers or don't operate in that way. It's very different from the regular portfolio, I think. So these are great suggestions you have. I have no idea how this all works. I'm looking at Michael eventually, how those two things flow across the current corporation, the new corporation, the role of stack. I'll ask that. I'll ask that, Maureen, when we get back in. I've asked the deputant that question, and I appreciate very much everything she's had to say.
Thank you, and I'm always available.
And are there any other questions for Maureen?
I think Brenda had her hand up. Or...
I don't.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen, for your comments. I'm struck by two things. One is a number of your suggestions are very practical and seemingly easy to implement.
Thank you.
I'm struck by, if you could comment a bit on this notion of independent channels for communication. You mentioned this both with the staff in terms of setting up some sort of independent channel for them to,
Mm-hmm.
and also you mentioned it in terms of the tenants, whether it's through a use of a mailbox or use of envelopes in order to ensure
Mm-hmm.
privacy and the repercussions from staff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always concerned when I hear stuff like that because these are the subtext of things that are often not on the surface and discussed. Is there some worry or concern amongst tenants and or staff, from your experience, about if they speak up, there's repercussions?
I have heard direct concerns, yes, from both staff and tenants. And I've seen it happen with tenants.
And the repercussions take what form? Is it just denial of service? Is it just verbal comments? What's the nature of the repercussions that happens?
The ones I've heard personally are the verbal abuse of verbal language. But tenants are sometimes afraid of having it affect their services.
And affect their services in what way? That they would lose their housing or lose their subsidy?
Will they get the attention they need when they have an issue in their apartment?
Okay.
Or will they be ignored?
Okay. So is there, I don't know how to put this, but any advice or anything you want to highlight to us that we should be sensitive to in terms of tenant-staff relations? I mean, are they tense? Is it by the case by case basis? Are some buildings better than others?
I believe that some buildings are better than others, and I also believe that it's some staff. I mean, and all the staff are different, just as we all are. And the thing about the staffing model is that, very unfortunately, and down the road it'll be something to look at, but staff rotate through like it's a revolving door.
Okay.
A lot of buildings right now, the small and mid-sized buildings, have shared staff. So they're constantly coming and going, and you never know when they're going to be here. But it's a revolving door. So you may have a problem with one staff, and then 2 months later that staff is gone. But I have heard in the past, tenants being, we had a survey that was put out by the pest management department at one time.
Sure.
And it did not come with envelopes. And as soon as I read my copy, I said, oh no, this is going to create problems. And sure enough, it did. You know, people that were honest on the survey got yelled at by the superintendent because it actually pointed to the fact that they held some responsibility in the problem, and they did. But they felt the repercussions over that. So I just think if you really want the truth from both staff and tenants, there should be some setup for them to. I wouldn't want it to be completely overwhelming and you're listening to every single problem that's ever been created, but certainly worth giving some thought to.
And similarly, you mentioned the staff finding some sort of independent channel to voice some concerns. I guess it applies there that there are some staff, the staff fear repercussions from other staff or from management?
I think it's more from management.
Okay.
And I want to say too, this is because I'm involved with a lot of people. I'm not focusing solely on my building. There are other buildings where this happens as well.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate that.
Thank you for asking.
Are there any other questions for Maureen? Well, Maureen, thank you very much. You have raised both some significant challenges and opportunities for us. As you know, we are moving forward in collaboration with TCHC as we through this transition period of preparing to become the landlord. But this input is very helpful to us, and Michael and his team are working very closely with TCHC to provide input and also to begin to shape some of the directions going forward. And you will, I'm sure, over time meet Arlene Howells, who is our head of communications, and will be working with the tenant groups. And so we really welcome your input going forward. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to it as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, Michael, perhaps Councillor Fletcher, did you have a question for Michael related to our involvement with the stack before
No,
we?
I just have a question around the seniors housing transition, which of course will include the involvement with the stack, but based on Michael's unfortunately, Maureen wasn't there to tell us at the beginning. We heard Michael, then Maureen, and I guess we're going back to Michael now. Is that right, Maureen? Chair
Well,
Maureen.
I thought before, yes, because unfortunately that was unavoidable because of the
Of course.
timing of our agenda. But I thought before we get into discussion, I would invite any questions for Michael based on the draft transition plan that he has presented for our consideration. So would you like to lead off, Councillor Fletcher?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Thanks so much, Maureen. I guess I gather, has the shared services vendor been procured already? That looks like the city was leading on that. If so, who was it and is it?
We actually have a meeting of the leadership of the city with Paul, myself and Jag and staff this afternoon. We're going to get an update. So I haven't heard yet if who it is. I was involved in the selection process, so I and the city staff and Toronto Community Housing went through a process of through the procurement process, but the final part of that is with the city, and in fact the city is the client in this relationship, but we'll be providing that service to Toronto Community Housing and Toronto Seniors Housing. So I think I'll get an update this afternoon, Councillor Fletcher, as to where that is. I expect it's very soon if it's not completed yet.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Then I guess the list of the services that might be part of that, that's being developed between September and November. Will we be, I'm just going to ask, would this corporation be managing the service providers, have authority over the delivery of service in the shared service agreement?
That's a very good question, Councillor Fletcher, and it will depend, and that will be part of the planning. So we can choose to, if there are outside services providers, we can choose to take over those contracts for the seniors buildings, if that makes sense in terms of our work as a corporation. Or we could choose to, in collaboration with Toronto Community Housing, have them continue to manage those providers. And that may vary depending on the type of service. And what we feel as a corporation is really core to our work in being a landlord and serving the needs and having programs for seniors tenants. So there may be some services where we feel, you know, that's really not our core business, nor does it make sense for us to kind of manage those contracts. That very good expertise is at Toronto Community Housing for managing those contracts. And we will continue to work with them at Toronto Community Housing in the context of them managing those contracts. I think whatever that service is, we will of course continue to liaise and coordinate with Toronto Community Housing on any service that's provided within those buildings, whether we end up managing the contracts, of course, that will be our business, or if it's Toronto Community Housing managing those. So that's to be determined, and the board will see all of that and be able to review all of that with the arguments back and forth as to what makes sense for us to take on as a corporation.
And will there be a list of all the shared services that?
Yes.
And I guess I'm going to ask if Stack is set up by the city. That was surprising. I didn't know that. At TCHC, what's your ability to get advice from Stack, or the forum you would get that kind of advice that we heard today from Maureen around communications and other things of that nature that may be very important in looking at which services should be shared and which services would be discrete to the Seniors Corp.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a vital question, Councillor Fletcher, and it will give me an opportunity to address a little bit about the issue of tenant engagement and what we are planning and can do. As Maureen indicated, Stack is really currently, as I understand it, the only fully organized group of tenant representatives from the seniors buildings at Toronto Community Housing. And that's why Jag and I took the opportunity to communicate through working with Stack at that meeting a week or so ago. And that was, from my point of view, tremendously valuable and important for us to be able to hear from tenants prior to this work plan coming to the boards for approval. So we went through it and we talked about it, including the date and the issues that may come up. As Maureen indicated, and as I understand from Toronto Community Housing, the process by which tenant representatives from across the system are in place through a process of elections and other setup activities that Toronto Community Housing are engaged with, which would give us, I think, an opportunity to communicate in an organized way, if you like, with a much broader set of representatives of tenants in the buildings. That process is not completed yet, as Maureen indicated in her deputation. I think that would be a very good way to be able to communicate with a much broader set of tenants from across the system. And we hope to be able to do that. Arlene is working on our behalf right now very actively with Toronto Community Housing to plan out how we can engage with tenants. We do want to do it through existing mechanisms, because I think if we try and set up parallel mechanisms for us as a corporation with Toronto Community Housing, it's going to get very confusing very quickly for tenants. So we'd like to use Toronto Community Housing mechanisms. They are currently and will be to the date of transition the tenant's landlord, and so I think it's appropriate to do that. But on the other hand, as Maureen has stated, and I think this is right on the money, is the tenants have a very keen interest and appropriately so, in how we're setting up as a corporation and the things that we're doing to get to transition, and what it's going to look like around transition and what it's going to look like after transition. One of the things that I heard at the meeting, again, Maureen emphasized that today, and I think we will want to be a corporation that does this, is that they would like to be involved as early as possible in the consultations about what the plans are and helping to develop them. And I think that will be not only important for tenants, it's going to be important for us to kind of get things right. So Arlene and I will be looking for opportunities with Toronto Community Housing to bring things to tenants through those channels as early as possible, in terms of what we're thinking, how things are going, things like the list of shared services, so that they can see all of that. None of this stuff's confidential. And we want to get as much input as early as possible as we can. So Arlene's going to be working hard on that, and I'll offer for Arlene to make a couple of comments in a minute on that process. But and ideally, that process of broader tenant representation across the system, hopefully complete, to use that process as well. Just one other comment I'll make that Maureen alluded to in her comments, which I heard as well at the STAC meeting, which was valuable to hear, was this kind of worry about changes that may take place for tenants, that they'll see big changes taking place. And, my message and JAG message to STAC, and hopefully we'll be able to communicate more broadly with tenants, is that, all of the things that, that they're used to in terms of things working and how they interact, that they're not going to see major changes prior to the transition. But all of the issues that they've brought up in terms of what they would like to see in the future, we will be starting to look at, including, the whole issue of how we engage with tenants. And my message to STAC was, we're going to review with them all of that, including all of the suggestions that Maureen came up with today. I think we as a corporation will review all of that in terms of how we might adjust and change how we engage with tenants over the medium term as we start up as an operating company. So, I think that's going to be a vital part of our work. But, the way in which, the rent geared to income program works, all of those issues, I tried to calm things in terms of, you're not going to see big changes. We want to make this transition as smooth and effective and without disruption for tenants as we go through it. But over the medium to longer term, we will review together all of the issues that we think might be improved for seniors tenants over the longer term. Thanks, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that really detailed answer. I really appreciate it. And of course, the rent geared to income, the city is the service manager for all the RGI units in the whole city. So we still have that relationship in that way. I'm just interested in STAC and how you're seeing it, because technically it's a third party. It's, I believe, and I could be corrected and you might know, that it was set up through Tenants First, which is the city, driving the changes at Toronto Community Housing. But through an interview process, they were selected much the same way that the board members were selected for this corporation, with interviews and who's got the ability to give that type of advice. So I guess I just expect that they will be a pretty important part of the development of everything, and the thread that we pull through from the very beginning, more so than the tenant engagement system, which is entirely a TCHC setup system. So the STAC, I think, and I'd like to get that confirmed, is really, it's another leg of the stool. It's been people selected for their expertise, ability to advise. Carrie's nodding her head, and really are an important part of the success of a seniors corporation. That's what I'm hearing and seeing. But I'd like to have that confirmed. Carrie's going to speak about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Paula, you're right on the money. People were interviewed for skills, representing different parts of the city, and I understand as well different tenure in the building. So you've got as much of a representative sampling as you possibly can have in a in a reasonably small group. But they are a very good representative sampling of the tenant voice.
Okay, Michael, do you want to make any more comment on STAC at this point, or can we move on to any other questions?
Happy to move on, Maureen.
Brenda?
You're on mute, Brenda.
You're on mute, Brenda.
Sorry, I always do this. Just following up on the comments of Michael and Paula and the comments of the other Marine, the deputant. It seems to me, whether it's, I guess it's a form of STAC. Some of the solutions are basically just doing what was supposed to be done. Now, she mentioned something about elections. Carrie, you mentioned about how people were appointed. So I'm not certain whether it's an appointment thing or an election thing. Either way, ensuring that process is completed, because part of the discouragement is you start a process and then you don't finish it. So if there's a need to get further representation or more broader representation, then please, let's just do it instead of waiting around for yet another report on a report. And you know, I'm the second point I want to mention about her comments, and the reason why I asked her those questions is we really need to understand as a board all these subtext issues of repercussions. Now, I'm not a tenant. I haven't been in recently in social service engagement with subsidized housing. But if I know that these are topics and concerns of repercussions, then we as a board need to know that too. So when we take over the staff and all these arrangements you're talking about, we need to be really concerned about training for attitude and how they treat people, because otherwise we're just replicating the same old stuff and we'll be dumped with the problems of the prior era. And I really don't want us to become a dumping ground for what TCH couldn't manage. Okay, so I have other questions of Michael about the transition plan, but I really want to stress that so many of these suggestions are practical. Why can they not be implemented sooner rather than later? And we can discuss at another point whether it's a stack form that we want, but we've got something in place that people seem to like and are discouraged that it hasn't been followed through and listened to. And her comments about, are you consulting with us or are you presenting us with a fait accompli, is a really, really important point.
Thanks, Brenda. Michael, do you want to respond further on any of those points, or?
No, just to say that
No.
we're working very actively with Toronto Community Housing. I'm quite. I thought the meeting with Stack was terrific.
Great.
I'm very happy to continue talking to Stack in lieu of, and just to clarify, Brenda, the elections process is for this broader set of representatives from buildings right across the seniors housing unit, and that's the process that's not complete yet, and we would like to be able to use that process as well. But you know, any organized group that's already in place or are about to be in place, I would like to have the opportunity for us to engage with, as it's a, you know, it is a existing channel that we can talk to tenants.
Okay.
I
And
see,
Maureen,
yes,
I have a couple questions on the transition plan. Can I continue with that, or do you want to do something different?
No, that's fine. I think if we can get the questions about the transition plan, that would be very helpful.
Yes,
and then we'll go into any further discussion.
Okay. First question, Michael, it was on the shared services. What does the shared services include? I mean, what's the range of things we're talking about here? Are we talking about pest control? Are we talking about consultants? What is the range of things on the shared?
Yes and yes. It's a long list, actually. So under the agreement by which we lease the buildings, Toronto Community Housing will continue to have a responsibility for all major capital. You know, if the roof needs fixed or there's a boiler that needs replacing, that will be under Toronto Community Housing, and that's settled. We will have an interest in that, in making sure that Toronto seniors housing buildings are appropriately on the priority list. And as you know, the city has undertaken a terrific program to upgrade over time all of the Toronto community housing buildings, and will be, and that's in about, I think it's about halfway through, but it's got another several years to go. Our buildings will be on that list, and we'll want to make sure that continues. So that will be a service that's continued to be provided by Toronto Community Housing. We will have all of the staff that do all of the transactional work with the seniors tenants and of the staff working in the buildings. There's a whole set of services, and you've mentioned two of them, which is pest control is one of them. In the middle, if you like, small repairs, pest control, all of the back office functions that Toronto Community Housing provides to support all of the transactions with tenants. For example, there's a whole information technology system that supports the database for all of the transactions with tenants. So there's a whole long list of services that we have to go through one by one with Toronto Community Housing, with the help of this consultant that the city is going to secure, and come back to tenants and to the board with, here's our plan for this whole set of services. So some of it will be more administrative stuff between the two corporations, but some of it will be what's happening in the buildings as well. And
if we could group them by administrative versus things that have operational impact day to day on tenants, can we be very cautious about just continuing with existing contracts? There's a benefit in negotiating fresh and setting the terms of our expectations as distinct with what has been done in the past. And I'm just a little concerned we're just transferring everything over. So during this review, can we have a little critical eye here in terms of its impact on the tenants, and if it's a pressure point? And I imagine pest control might be one of them, it always is in every building. But it might be a chance to start fresh with a new contractual arrangement with those vendors, those service providers, setting our terms and our expectations clear.
That's precisely, Brenda, how we're going to go about it. We're going to look at those contracts in detail with those questions. If we were looking at them for the future, would we set them up in a different way? Might we have input to that? And even it still might be that we end up with Toronto Community Housing providing that, but under a different contractual arrangement. Or we may say, as you say, we'll take that on and we'll do the contract ourselves.
Brenda, I'm going to move on. We have a couple of other people with their hands up and some who haven't yet put their hands up. So time permitting, I'll come back to you on questions. But Linda, you had a question for Michael?
Yeah, I'll be brief, Michael, and I was actually going to raise it before our very articulate deputant, just in terms of a recommendation around communication. I think that what I've learned is sometimes what isn't said is actually, like, if people aren't aware of what's happening, then they actually assume that things are happening that aren't necessarily. And I think the work plan is a good one. I think that the communication and engagement, and I'm really encouraged by the people that you're bringing on, are probably critical to the success over the next year. And just even for our purposes, so we're not actually always hammering at you, that, being kind of really explicit in terms of how are we communicating, kind of what we're phase in. If we could do some, Q&As, I think that the suggestions in terms of posters, it's interesting in terms of the computers. What I've learned with seniors is not to assume that people don't have computers. So you really actually have to have both models, paper and pen, and also reaching out in any way. So just a recommendation, and I think it just might help us to see that really embedded in there. And STAC could be part of that, but I think I like the fact that you're actually looking at a broader engagement, because there's other stakeholders. So just some thoughts.
Very, very helpful, Linda. And Arlene's already in the process of drafting things like Q&As that we can use in terms of our messaging, but also things that we can communicate directly. So I'm hoping over the next several weeks, and by the time we get to the next board meeting, you'll see some of those materials and how we're going to go about communicating, because I absolutely agree. We want this to be as transparent and with as much input as we possibly can along the way.
Carrie?
Just very, very quick, Brenda, just to clarify a point that you made. The members of STAC were interviewed and selected. The other group to which Maureen was referring were members of the tenant engagement system, which we agreed from a previous meeting doesn't work as is. And proof of that is that after 3.5 years, most of the buildings don't have tenant reps that were elected under that system.
Okay.
So it's, yeah.
Are there any other questions for Michael on the transition plan? Paula?
Yes, I just wondered, Michael, because we're really talking about a lot of 83 buildings, and I think I'm interested to know all the facility conditions there. I may have asked this before, but somebody's pulling that together. So what's the minor capital forecast? What's the major capital forecast? Has that already been set aside? Probably when the houses were transferred, the city tenants first group had compiled all of that information. So it's always a third party who's pulling that together. And I don't know if that's happened yet for the facilities piece, and the vendor would be able to have that. Could you let me know, please?
Yeah, I don't know in detail, Councillor Fletcher. I certainly have seen and we'll be getting all of this information from Toronto Community Housing, but I've certainly seen the major capital program and where the buildings sit with respect to that. We will be, and Norm will be, along with the General Counsel, be looking at all of those issues in detail with Toronto Community Housing. So I don't off the top of my head have those lists, but we will for sure be getting that information.
So at some point, we'll have a list of the buildings, where they sit with the facilities condition index, where they sat for major capital or and some of the deficiencies. That'll all be tabled at some point. This corporation will have that, and the board will have that.
It will be both tabled, and I expect it will be part of our lease agreement, that there'll be an understanding in the lease agreement as to exactly where we sit with respect to that work, and that, that there is accountability in the lease agreement and processes for us to continually review that, be consulted on changes to that schedule, those kinds of things. I expect that all of that will be in the lease agreement.
Thank you very much. And what Carrie just said about the transfer of the tenant engagement system, since there's so few tenant engagements already, I don't know how to do that, Maureen, through you or Michael, but that we should look at as a corporation. I think Carrie's saying, can we review that or have STAC assist in setting up what would be a deeper, more, I don't know, Carrie, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think out of today, that's probably helpful that we're relying on STAC for a lot of things, including the most robust tenant engagement model possible, including the review of the current one, so that we're not, I don't want to be confused here around who's supposed to be advising us. STAC apparently is advising us. The tenant engagement people, that's not an engagement focus for us. Perhaps you think it is, I don't know. I think we should have that conversation. That's all. Sorry, Maureen. We've hit a really important, critical question here.
And as Michael,
because the only reason we have this corporation is because of tenants. It's not for any other reason. Not because we love Michael and we want him to come and spend a year with us, because we do, but it's really and truly only for the seniors. And that's the only reason. So
I think Michael has indicated repeatedly that both the focus on tenant engagement and the responding and changing the process to address the needs over time is a very high priority that is well underway already by virtue of the joint first meeting with STAC and the establishing those relationships.
I agree.
Maybe I could just make
sorry.
I was just going to make a quick comment, Councillor Fletcher, with respect to the, again, my message to STAC was that as a new corporation and as we get underway, we are not wedded to a particular way of engaging tenants that's currently in place. So I think we will review all of it and potentially adjust at the appropriate time and undertake ways that are specific to seniors, because I think that the process that's underway at Toronto Community Housing is for everybody. And so we as a corporation can have a focus on what is the best way specifically of engaging seniors, and we'll review all of that as together.
I guess as a shared service, are we taking the shared service of the current tenant engagement, or are we looking at developing something that might be different? And it's kind of important, Carrie, I think you've got an important viewpoint here, to do that early rather than let that process continue from taking these building representatives. I don't know. I just think it's one of those things that needs to be sorted out closer to this end of the process than at the other end, the end of the line.
Right. So I think I can almost guarantee that subsequent to board approval, but the tenant engagement will not be a shared service. That will be something we take on our own with seniors. The issue of how much change we try to put in place prior to the transition, though, Councillor Fletcher, is an important one. And I think we have to balance the things that we can effectively do prior to transition and those things that we can start to influence, and then really start the work of changing towards transition and after transition. So that's an important thing we're going to have to balance over this transition period.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so just we obviously have the motion to approve the transition plan, but before we consider that, I just wanted to update you on Michael and my conversation with Tim Murphy and Jag Sharma. We met last week to have a discussion both about our shared commitment to ensure the successful transition and what would be necessary to ensure that success, recognizing that each of our boards has its own interests and responsibilities in this process, but both boards have a responsibility to successfully reach agreement on the various steps along the way to ensure that we are in place as a operating corporation on the 1st of June. We agreed in that discussion that it would be valuable to have before both boards, and we'll have this at our next meeting in October, the principles to guide our respective boards in their consideration and approvals of the matters that will come before each of us. As you've seen in the transition plan, there are one or two at least review discussions on each of the elements of the transition plan, and then there is board approval, not by our board or their board, but by each board of each of the components of the transition. But obviously it will be helpful to us to have a common framework within which to make those decisions. And there are principles that were given to us in the shareholder direction that were reviewed with us at the time of orientation. We will be coming forward to each board. Michael and Jag are going to be working on that over the next little while to both review those principles that are currently in place and to determine whether there are any additional principles which should come jointly to both boards to inform and provide context and foundation for this process. So that will be coming forward to you in October. The other matter that we discussed, and it was really at my initiative, was the potential for an informal meeting of representatives, Tim and myself, and potentially others from each board jointly at critical points along the way, so that our two CEOs could identify for us any issues that they think we need to particularly bring to each board for consideration. This would not be a decision-making forum. It would be really an opportunity to be a sounding for the CEOs in preparation for the meetings of our respective boards, to make sure that we have a shared understanding of both the issues and any matters that require particular consideration. So at this point, I just wanted to get a sense of whether that opportunity, which I think demonstrates two things. It demonstrates our shared commitment to the successful oversight at the board level, and it would not be an oversight. It would not be decision making, but it would be really a sounding forum at critical stages in the process where we would have joint discussion of key issues. So can I get any feedback on that particular opportunity? Maybe I can ask Linda, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that I'm encouraged by that. I think that you know, we want to have a really strong seniors corporation, but we also want to actually recognize that this is a very unique relationship. That just even your comments, Brenda, about having our own systems and processes. Sorry, somebody of course is calling me right now. But also recognizing where that probably doesn't make sense. So kind of thinking about where things are working. Don't break them. But I'm supportive of this, and I think it will be really good for the board to see that ongoing as we go through. And I'm encouraged by the progress in that regard.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, so before we consider the motion, is there any other matters related to the transition plan, recognizing that this is now going to be top of mind for us at every meeting, one or other components of this transition plan as we go forward, a very comprehensive piece of work that needs to be undertaken to get us to the 1st of June. Are there any other specific matters that anybody wishes to raise? Brenda?
Just a quick one on the employee transfer. Are we still in the labor dispute, or was that resolved? Or
It's resolved.
It's resolved. And related to that, when the staff are transferred over, the employee benefits, will they be coming under the city plan, or will it be a parallel plan that we'll have to develop for the staff?
It's good, very good question, Brenda. With the issue of benefits, pensions, all of that, we have to do the work on that.
Okay.
And again, we'll be looking at the opportunity to leverage if we can, and if it makes sense for us as a corporation, of course. But and Helen will start that work when she starts next week.
Okay. And related to the budget, is someone mentioned rent geared to income. Maybe you can't answer it now, but if TCH is leasing the buildings to us, we are the landlord. Who is responsible? Is it the service manager through TCH that for the rent geared to income arrangements and formulations? How does that work? Or we just adopt what is the existing system? I'm just concerned about tenants feeling maybe they might be concerned about, does this mean all those provisions might change, and we might be worried about lack of clarity there.
If I might, Maureen, yeah, and Kevin has just messaged me to remind me that we're going to have and we're looking actually at a number of topics for orientation opportunities for our board, and this will be one of them. The whole rent geared to income system. We're going to also look at the Office of Community Housing Equity, which we will be required to use for 2 years. That's going to come back. So we're likely going to organize another orientation later in the fall, and we'll look at including the whole rent geared to income program, and how that's going to work, because we will be a new player in that, of course. There's lots going on between the city and Toronto Community Housing.
That's right.
Which I've
Yeah,
been
there's some
privy
change.
to, actually, which has been very helpful in terms
Yeah.
of how that works. And then how that income is going to, that comes out of the rent geared to income program, how that will come to us as a corporation for seniors tenants in the context of our lease. All of that we have to work out with the city and with Toronto Community Housing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I just have a follow-up on that one, Maureen, if I can, because I noticed from our board orientation, it was really an interesting fact to see that 97.5% of all the senior tenants are rent geared to income. And I think it's a different split at the TCHC side. And I think Brenda's really right to say people might be nervous about what's going to happen to their RGI status with the new corporation, and to make sure everybody's very calm and that nobody falls through the cracks during the transition. Because
that's and I heard that too, Councillor Fletcher, and again my message was, you're not going to see changes as a result of our coming into operation as a corporation with respect to that whole program. As if people have technical questions, Kevin's on the line and can answer them, but many of the parts of that system are provincially regulated, of course.
Yes, it's just the
not allowed to
communications.
change.
Yeah, it's the comms.
And so,
yeah.
So I did try and provide that message that they're not going to see changes as a result of us coming into operation as a corporation.
Understood, but people, whether you say that, tenants will be worried that that might happen. Yeah. So that's part of that communication, says not to worry about your RGI, because just about everybody is a single rent geared to income tenant in our portfolio, in our incoming portfolio. And that is something that we need to keep our mind on.
That might be a theme for a poster communication. The things that won't change under, something that.
I think that's something that you could have a discussion with the stack about, the best way to keep people calm during this period. But I did have one other question that was raised, which has to do with all the new employees who are being brought on for the seminal function in our buildings, the 83 buildings, which are tenant-facing employees, community, I can't remember what the title is. And I know they're being hired currently over a period of time, and they'll come into our portfolio in June. But Michael, I'd like to know if anybody from the Seniors Corp had input into the job description, or doing any of the hiring, any of the training, because this is the first front-facing staff, that new staff that will be hired. Everybody else has been there for a long time. These are brand new staff. So was there any provision for that, for you to assist or to put parameters around it or to have input in any way? And if not, can we make sure that would happen for the rest of the hiring?
It's a good question, Councillor Fletcher. I mean, we really weren't set up, and nor should we, I don't think, have been in terms of our where we were as a corporation in terms of getting involved in kind of the day-to-day issues of hiring staff. That said, Toronto Community Housing have been very good in terms of letting me know where things are with respect to that and the next phase of rollout of the integrated service model. And you're correct, of course, that there is new budget being provided to support new hiring for those positions that are going to support seniors in the buildings according to the integrated service model. And as you know, we also were able to discuss and shape the direction with respect to the hubs as well. So Toronto Community Housing have been very good in liaising with us and letting us know where these programs are. I think the issues around, and they'll continue to let us know where that's at and where they are in the process. I don't think that we will be set up, nor should we be getting involved in the day-to-day decisions about in the actual hiring process for those individuals. I have confidence in Toronto Community Housing and I've talked to the people both with working in the integrated service model, both there and at the city, and with their head of HR at Toronto Community Housing, that they're going through very good processes to hire those individuals, which is partway through, as you know. So that's where it stands at the moment, Councillor Fletcher. And you know, once Helen comes on board next week, she will be doing the same in terms of looking at where all of those programs are, and you know what the numbers are looking like and where they are in the process. And I think the Toronto Community Housing team will be very good at liaising with Helen and letting them know how that's going, whether it's going well or they're having challenges finding people. And we'll have to take all of that into account as we then plan for the transfer of those employees into our corporation. And we'll have an opportunity through that process to engage with those employees, of course, as we go along.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so Monique, would you bring up the motion, please? So just to remind us that the identical joint transition plan will be presented to the Board of Directors of Toronto Community Housing for their consideration on the 7th of October. And it is very much a joint process going forward at both the at the operational level, and each board will make its own decisions from its own mandate and best interests. But this is the resolution that we receive the report and approve the Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, Toronto Community Housing Corporation joint transition work plan with a June 1st, 2022 transition date. So may I have a motion to adopt that resolution?
So moved, Carrie.
Carrie, thank you. A seconder?
I'll second.
Jim, second. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair, just a comment. I think this was a tremendously excellent piece of work. It's very sound, and I also very much appreciate the input from the board members on it. I think we're in good hands. I feel very comfortable with the transition.
Thanks, Warren. Any other comments before we take the vote? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Well, this is a very momentous decision. We now have a target date of June 1st, 2022. We have much work to do between now and then with Michael and his new team in collaboration with their counterparts at TCHC and us as the two boards to facilitate and approve as we go forward. So thank you all for this. Michael, thank you for all of the work that you and Jag have done with your respective teams, your little team and his bigger team, to get us to this place. It's a very, very momentous day. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Maureen, and thanks to the board. And as I say, this will go forward to Toronto Community Housing Board on October 7th. And hopefully it will be approved there. And then we have a joint date, June 1st, 2022. And just by the way, we will invite JAG from time to time on issues that we think it will be helpful for him to, for you to get to know JAG as well at our board meeting. So we'll look for agenda items that are appropriate, and will be it'd be good to have JAG here as well.
Great, thank you. So that takes us to the end of our agenda. Whoops. Could I have a motion to terminate the meeting?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Warren, thank you. Second.
I'll second, it's Linda.
Linda, thank you. Well, thank you all. And all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. So we will be working hard in our respective work groups between now and October, and look forward to seeing you all again on October 28th. And thanks again to Michael and your team for getting us to this point. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe and well.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.